morning, everybody. So welcome to TASO, Centre for Transforming Access and Student Outcomes, and our first HE Evidence and Evaluation Conference. As Omar has said, I'm Eunice Simmons. I'm the chair of TASO's very strong board of trustees. We have just spun out as a charity, which is very exciting. I'm also VC at the University of Chester. It is very good to have you with us for what promises to be a really interesting and challenging programme over the next 2 days. And I think this event speaks to the core purpose of TASO. It was born out of a determination of many in the sector to get to grips with what really works to improve students' progression in and through university and their subsequent life chances. And if I tell you that TASO's first title was the Evidence and Impact Exchange, you get the picture. So I'm sure today and tomorrow are set to be great days, full of insightful conversations from experts and policymakers on evidence and evaluation in HE. And these conversations are more important than ever. And as a VC, I'm acutely aware of the challenges faced by the sector. And in the context of today, particularly in relation to its applicants and students, there's increasing evidence from wider society that the coronavirus pandemic has exacerbated existing inequalities. And in overseeing Chester's activities to support applicants and our current students, I can vouch for the fact this is being played out in HE. Digital access has certainly been an issue for many. For current students, we've supplied data packages, laptop software where needed, but even so, there will still be differential impacts of their home settings. And what about applicants? We've tried hard to ensure we've been as innovative as we can to reach them, but there'll certainly be gaps in what we've achieved and great potential we may have missed. So the recent events have actually sharpened TASO's focus on the importance of its work. And I think for HE, it's more important than ever to double down on our efforts to close equality gaps and continue to strive towards ambitious targets set out in our respective access and participation plans. And TASO has been set up to help you do just this. Funded by the Office for Students, as I say, we've recently become an independent charity after being established by Nottingham Trent University, King's College London, and the Behavioural Insights team in 2019. By working in partnership with you, the sector, to develop more robust evidence and embed best practice evaluation methods, TASO will provide the tools we all need to eliminate these equality gaps for our disadvantaged and underrepresented students. Because after all, it is the students who brought us all here today. They're at the heart of why we're working towards a future where all students have equal opportunities to access and succeed in higher education, and then to achieve successful and rewarding future lives and careers. So without further ado, we need to get on with the important stuff. It's my pleasure to hand over to Omar, who will now play the University Minister's speech. And I hope that all of you have a very rewarding couple of days. Thank you for your support of TASO and your engagement with us.
Thank you, Eunice. I'm about to now start the video from the Higher Education Minister, Michelle Donelan. If you could hold with me for a second, I'll be sharing her video via the Zoom link.
Good afternoon, and thank you for inviting me here today to speak to you about the vital role we can all play as we overcome COVID-19. I regret that we cannot be together today, and that instead we're once again speaking through screens in a manner that's become all too familiar to us by now. This pandemic really has forced us to adapt, and adapt fast in order to keep students learning during this historic and challenging pandemic. So I want to start by thanking everyone once again across our universities and higher education institutions for all that you've done over the last year. And with our fantastic vaccine rollout, we see now the light at the end of the tunnel. But one thing's for sure, levelling up Britain cannot wait. We need to double down on eliminating equality gaps in higher education. Those of you that know me will know just how passionate I am about social mobility. And COVID-19 certainly hasn't diluted this one bit. I want to be clear that as Universities Minister, this is my top priority. And that means making sure that access and participation in higher education is open to all who have the ability and the desire. It means making sure that those who grow up in the most disadvantaged households have the same opportunities to go to university as their peers and to succeed when they're there. It also means that they should be able to study courses with good graduate outcomes and complete those courses. And that is why when I first heard of TASO, I was truly excited to hear about the evidence it's been gathering to bolster these efforts. I support TASO's mission to develop that strong evidence around effective approaches to access and for students to succeed and progress to good quality employment and further study. Because we all know that evidence-led policy and practice in university access and successful participation is at the very heart of levelling up and providing equality of opportunity. And we know that we need to measure what matters, not just what is easy to measure. And it is easy to get people onto courses by making unconditional offers without considering whether they are academically suitable, or to reduce the attainment gap by grade inflation and offer more firsts. But let me be candid, that does not and will not deliver effective change, because we need to seriously question these practices. It is more difficult, but much more meaningful, to improve access by working closely with schools and pupils to raise academic performance and to drive improvement in outcomes by giving all students the support that they need to succeed, whatever their background. So I do hope that this conference can be a watershed moment in establishing what works for higher education, and as TASO develops a clearer understanding of what works in access and participation. I am already pleased to see how far TASO has come since the Department for Education's Social Mobility Action Plan committed to an evidence and impact exchange for widening access and successful participation in higher education back in 2017. Since its launch in 2019, both under Susanna's and now Omar's leadership, TASO has been quick to make an impact gathering and synthesizing evidence and leading projects in a range of key areas and understanding impacts on different groups of learners. I know from speaking to Vice-Chancellors just how valuable this work is already proving, and that the good practice is being shared around the sector. Many of you will know that I was the first in my own family to go to university, so I do know firsthand how it can change lives, because it changed mine. So my mission is to bring about real social mobility, and this is shared across the government. And with the sector, we want to enable every person with the potential to fulfil that potential. To do so, we must together ensure that work on access and participation focuses on delivering real social mobility. We need to equip students with the tools they need to make the right choices for them and their futures, including making sure that they can get onto and succeed in high quality courses that are valued by employers. Because the hard truth is that at times some students are tempted onto courses that offer them virtually nothing come graduation. The fact is that at times some students will pay thousands of pounds for a degree that leads them virtually nowhere. And we need to guard against encouraging more students onto courses which do not provide good graduate outcomes, because it is self-evident that this does not provide real social mobility and serves only to entrench inequality. It will be obvious to those listening today that there is a direct link between success at university and prior attainment at school. And that is why our schools reform are raising standards of attainment for all, and why we are asking universities to take on a more direct role in helping us to raise attainment in schools. But our work does not just stop with schools. We need to develop a society where training, retraining and learning throughout your life is second nature. We all need to stop thinking about education as something that you tick off and move on from, and start thinking about it as something that we can draw on throughout our lives. There's been a need to do this for a long time before COVID-19, because we all know that there are long-term structural issues. And that's why the Prime Minister has announced plans to introduce a lifelong learning loan entitlement as part of the Lifetime Skills Guarantee. And this will give people the opportunity to train, to retrain and to upskill throughout their lives to respond to the changing skills needs and employment patterns. It will have a massive transformative impact on post-18 study, delivering greater parity between further and higher education. And it'll do what it says on the tin. Introduced from 2025, the lifelong loan entitlement will provide individuals with a loan entitlement to the equivalent of 4 years of post-18 education to use over their lifetime. These steps will make it easier for students to navigate the options available, create a more streamlined funding system, and encourage provision to better meet the needs of people, employers, and the economy. Flexibility is the name of the game, and it will continue to be so as the future unfolds. And that is why it's been so important for people to be able to develop new life-changing skills as the economy changes. Equally important, though, is giving people the flexibility to study when they want and how they want. And this new loan entitlement means people can space out their studies, transfer credits between FE and HE institutions, and take up more part-time study. As part of the pathway towards the lifelong loan entitlement, we will stimulate the provision of high-quality, higher technical education and introduce pilots to incentivise more flexible and modular provision. We will consult on the details and the scope of the lifelong loan entitlement this year to make sure that it works as effectively as possible. And where necessary, we will put forward legislation this Parliament. But what is clear already is that modular provision will need to be at the very front and centre of any changes that we make. This modular education will be at the heart of our lifelong learning entitlement, revolutionising our education offer, both in higher and further education. And why? Because we need a real alternative to the traditional 3-year degree that remains out of the grasp of far too many. Because let's face it, it's hard, if not impossible, to take 3 years out of full-time employment when you potentially have a mortgage, children, or caring responsibility. Think for a minute about your friends and your family, and those that have not been able to take up a place at university because of existing commitments. Those who, by doing the right thing for their family, are held back from making a better life for themselves and their family. We are a government that will always back people who want to make a better life for themselves. But right now, we are seeing entrance to part-time study falling. The number of entrants to part-time study at English higher education providers fell steeply after 2012 and continued to decline at a slower pace. So I want all institutions, staff and students to know that I will be taking action to incentivise more flexible and modular provision. From 2022, we will be trialling loan-funded access to tuition fees for certain modules at a number of institutions across England. What we learn from this trial will inform our approach to lifelong learning, and it is a key step towards our delivery of the lifelong loan entitlement, as well as supporting some students to participate on shorter modular courses in England as early as 2022. But I can say today that this is real, transformative change. Change that will make us a fairer society, change that will make us a higher skilled society. This starts now because we have a choice today between carrying on with business as usual or making bold, brave changes that mean we can be even prouder of our universities. But perhaps more importantly, we will make changes that benefit students for generations to come. So I look forward to working with you to make this a reality. Thank you.
Thank you to the Minister, Michelle Donelan, the Minister for Higher Education. I think you'll agree that was an excellent speech for us to start the day, combining a very strong commitment to tackling social inequality, as well as some vision and some policies there that the government are looking to roll out to achieve that vision. I'm now going to move on to the part of the program where I get a chance to speak before the first panel. We are running slightly ahead of schedule. I think what we'll do is after my speech, we'll allow participants to have a quick coffee. But without further ado, I'm going to start sharing my screen and go right into my speech. Good morning. So thank you to everyone for attending TASO's first annual conference. Thank you especially to the Minister, Michelle Donelan, for her speech just now and for outlining the government's commitment to tackling equality gaps in higher education. As most of you know, and as Eunice has already outlined, TASO, the Center for Transforming Access and Student Outcomes, was established as an evidence center to tackle such gaps. That, of course, is the discussion that we're having today. We all know that equality gaps in higher education have been extensive and persistent for many decades. As this slide captures, TASO is focused on understanding and tackling all of these various gaps, from entry to the student experience to career outcomes. There's a lot of ambition there, but it's also important, I think, to recognize that inequalities at entry, for example, have an impact on inequalities at attainment and, of course, at careers. So both that there are inequalities at each stage of the student life cycle, as we call it, but also that inequalities at one stage of the life cycle affects another. So if we can get it right in terms of access, we're more likely to get it right in terms of career outcomes. But there are also independent barriers and independent inequality gaps at each stage of the student journey. The gaps in accessing higher education are, I think, especially for this audience, relatively well known. Working class children, and especially those eligible for free school meals, are much less likely to attend than better off children. In some schools, nearly every child ends up in higher education, while in others, very few do so. The slide you're looking at now shows the gap in university participation rates between children eligible for free school meals and those not eligible for free school meals over time. And it shows that while the gap is narrowing somewhat, it remains very large. The regional inequalities that the minister highlighted are equally stark, particularly at neighborhood level. And it's hard to see how economic opportunities and life chances can be leveled up with such significant gaps in qualification in different parts of Britain. The slide I'm presenting here shows that the large gap in university participation rates between free school meal and non-free school meal children extends to every region of the country. But it also shows how much more likely a free school meal child in London is to attend higher education than anywhere else. In fact, a free school meal child in inner London is more likely to attend university, 48% of them, than are non-free school meal children in every other region of the country. And the data at neighborhood level is, if anything, more striking still. For example, every postcode in the constituency of Nottingham North is in a low participation neighborhood, and the audience will be familiar with the extent of similar participation gaps wherever they live in Britain. Of course, inequalities don't exist just in terms of access. For some courses and providers, inequalities are particularly stark. For example, advantaged young people are around 25 times more likely to study medicine than are disadvantaged young people. And whatever course they end up studying, and at whatever institution, there are also gaps in terms of the degree qualifications our young people end up with when they leave, by ethnicity, class, and disability. This slide, for example, shows that whatever the prior attainment of ethnic minority children in schools, they're less likely to get a good degree outcome. And this applies to every ethnic minority group in the country. Furthermore, the impact of COVID-19 is likely to worsen some of these gaps, and not just for the current or upcoming cohort of 18-year-olds. We're already seeing inequalities widening further for primary age children, with likely impacts on higher education inequalities in a decade's time or more. Inequalities that affect young people today will still be having consequential effect in our society into the 22nd century. In other words, higher education in Britain is both affected by and directly influences the wider inequalities in our society. Yet we should not be overcome by doom and gloom. While we should be clear-sighted about the extent and impact of these inequalities, they are not inevitable. They can and should be tackled. The evidence shows that higher education participation rates have never been higher for those from the most disadvantaged backgrounds. This last year saw the highest ever participation rates from the lowest polar quintile, despite the context of the pandemic. So understanding the evidence is the first of what I argue are the 4 key aspects to tackling any social issue, including inequalities in higher education. To successfully tackle inequalities, we first need good data, which ensures our perceptions of which equality gaps are most extensive matches the reality. While in the UK, we do have a good range of data on higher education, there are still clearly some areas for improvement. For example, better information on individual pupils and family background, and wider, more consistent measures of student outcomes. In addition to data, the second theme of my talk then is focusing on what works. This will be no surprise to those of you who know TASO's origin, aims, and purposes. It's not enough to know about a problem. It's not enough, I would say, even to care about a problem. It's not even enough to think we need to go beyond analyzing or caring and actually also do something about that problem. We need to ensure that what we do actually works. TASO is part of a wider movement of what works centers to try to ensure just that. We need to ensure that our interventions are designed to effectively tackle inequalities in higher education or in any social policy area. Good intentions alone are not enough. Fortunately, the evidence suggests that many existing interventions are working, and there are a huge range of diverse and innovative interventions that have the prospect of making an even greater impact in tackling inequalities in HE. My colleagues at TASO have put together a toolkit on our website outlining what the evidence currently says on what works, a toolkit we are continually updating and revising as new evidence comes in. My third theme is that leadership matters and institutional buy-in. By leadership, I mean not just that vice chancellors, government ministers, university lecturers, or employers say the right things about tackling inequalities, though we should not discount the importance of leaders clearly articulating the values that should guide an organization. These leaders also need to make sure that institutional practices realize those values in reality. In the case of tackling inequalities, we've already heard the government minister's commitment, and I know the 400 of you in the audience reflect a wider consensus and commitment that higher education must do more to address these inequalities. Furthermore, we see clear and specific targets from the regulator, the Office for Students, to address a wide range of these inequalities, including, of course, access and participation, but also degree outcomes. I don't want to be complacent here, especially given the range, extent, and persistence of equality gaps in the UK. But it is important to recognize the relative consensus that disadvantaged young people aren't getting the same chances to attend and succeed in higher education as their more advantaged counterparts. And I think there's a consensus too, that institutions need to ensure that what they're actually doing is most effectively tackling these inequalities. This brings me to the fourth and final theme. This is that no social change happens without democratic or societal pressure. I'm speaking the morning after George Floyd's family got some sense of accountability for the injustice of his racist murder by police in Minnesota. Without the bravery of 17-year-old Darnella Frazier to film this horrific murder, without the national movement to demand Black Lives Matter, and perhaps without the global movement that followed, it is doubtful that the just verdict would have been reached. Racism in America, or indeed in Britain, is nothing new, but there is a reason we are speaking about it more in 2020 and 2021 than we were in previous years. That reason is because of committed and organized demands for social change. Reflecting on this painful, sobering moment, tackling any form of injustice or inequality cannot be achieved solely through good data, a commitment to what works, and leadership. Without listening to the voices of those affected, without wider civil society action and democratic pressure, no argument, no force of leadership alone can tackle inequalities, especially longstanding and societal ones. At the same time, it's important to be clear about our respective roles. TASO is an evidence center committed to what works. We are not a campaigning organization, and neither are most or many of you. We should be clear about our role, recognizing also it's important in ensuring that the policies and practice designed to tackle inequalities actually have their intended effect. But we should also recognize that without the work of others, without a wider societal demand for change, our vision can't be realized. There are many pieces to the puzzle, many ways of acting for social change. We should neither deflect from or apologize from our core activities, where we focus on research or where we focus on access and participation activities, but nor should we imagine that they alone will ensure that the arc of history bends towards justice. Our vision and mission at TASO is clear, and is one that I know this audience shares. I am personally, and I think I speak for much of my staff as well, and probably many of you at this conference, proud to be called a nerd or a wonk. I'm happily spend more time reading research, making sure that I understand the evidence, including the newest evidence that might challenge my preconceptions. Over the next 2 days, you're going to hear from a variety of experts. You'll hear technical discussions, learn about different methods, data, policies, and practices. But let's never forget why we focus on getting the ideas, evidence, and practice right. The aim ultimately is to tackle equality gaps. And those gaps are not just ideas or statistical measures. They reflect real human lives. Ideas, or at least good ideas, are conceived for the purpose of human betterment, even the most technical ideas, even the most abstract ideas. I thought I'd give you an inspirational slide now. In the end, TASO's work, and the work of all of us in seeking to tackle social inequalities, is to improve people's lives. I welcome all of you to this 2-day conversation on how we might better do so by tackling inequalities in higher education in Britain. Thank you.